Last year at times Sonoma Raceway, Shane Van Gisbergen times led times 97 of the 110 laps, a performance so dominant it barely resembled a competition. This year, he won another record-breaking race at the same track, then turned around and called his Cup car subpar. If you follow the storylines that actually decide races, hit that subscribe button now, because this one builds toward a finish at Sonoma times that carries real stakes. On Times Saturday, the 27th of June 2026, Shane Van Gisbergen times won the times, Pit Boss Food Max 250 times, at times Sonoma Raceway times from the pole, driving the times No. 9, JR Motorsports Chevrolet. He led 66 of 79 laps times and crossed the line times 1.324 seconds times ahead of his teammate times Connor Zilisch. This marked his 6th career win times in the times NASCAR Xfinity Series times and his times 2nd win of 2026. Every one of those 6 victories has come on a road or street course. With this result, Van Gisbergen times became the first driver in history to win times 6 Xfinity Series races on a road course. He came into the weekend level with Marcos Ambrose, who won 5 times between 2008 and 2014 times across times 77 starts, with 5 of those coming at Watkins Glen times and 1 at times Montreal in 2011. Van Gisbergen times passed that benchmark in just times 39 starts, becoming the most successful foreign-born driver in the series road course history. He has not reached the all-time record. A.J. Allmendinger times holds the most Xfinity Series road course wins of any driver. The accurate framing of times Van Gisbergen times right now places him next in line, climbing toward a record that still belongs to someone else. The stage strategy decided the outcome. Van Gisbergen times flipped both stages to hold track position, then shifted into fuel-saving mode to manage the gap behind him. He explained the approach afterward. Right from the start, I could feel that the changes of the car were better and was able to manage the gap at the start. We flipped both stages trying to keep the track position. I was a bit surprised that the number 1 car didn't at the second stage. Then it was just fuel-saving mode and trying to manage. The car was amazing. While times Van Gisbergen times ran a clean race up front, Connor Zilisch times faced a far harder path. He started times 30th times after a leaking tire during qualifying, forced an unapproved adjustment, sending him to the rear of the field. He then sped on pit road and received a pass-through penalty, dropping him to times 33rd times at the start of the second stage. He recovered to win the second stage and finished times 2nd. Zilisch times said afterward, "A caution or something to bunch us back up would have been nice. I feel like our Roto-Rooter Chevrolet was fast enough to compete, but we were just matching each other the entire run there, and he was probably saving fuel and managing his stuff and giving me hope. I'll always believe we had something for him." Brent Cruz, times finish times, 3rd times, in the times number 19, Joe Gibbs Racing Toyota, scoring a race-high 50 points times and moving into times 11th times in the series standings. He said, "We maximized our day with stage points and stuff like that, which was kind of the name of the game for us today so we can race the next couple of weeks." Anthony Alfredo times finished, times 4th times, and times Parker Retzlaff times finished, times 5th times. Colleague Racing, with Alfredo times also leading the second most laps and winning the first stage. Series leader times, Justin Allgaier times, finish times 26th times but still holds a times 207-point lead times over second place times Jesse Love. On the same afternoon, Van Gisbergen times delivered a different message about his Times Cup Series, Times car. He qualified times 6th times and was 5th fastest in practice in the times No. 97 Trackhouse Racing Chevrolet. His assessment was direct. "My car was pretty subpar, to put it nicely. We definitely need to improve it. It was a bit of a struggle, really. Obviously, we were pretty reasonable out of Group 1. People smoked us in Group 2. We need to make some improvements, but in the areas we can adjust, we can make big improvements." Last year at this same track, he led 97 of 110 laps times and won both the race and the pole. He arrives this weekend as the defending winner. The stakes trace back to the previous weekend at times Naval Base Coronado times in San Diego. where Times Van Gisbergen Times chose not to take stage points and was then wrecked during a restart following contact from Times Austin Hill, a sequence that ended his result. He described the decision afterward. "That's always the tough thing. You want to score stage points, but then you can bury yourself in the pack. You can't really strategize around it." Van Gisbergen Times currently sits below the Times NASCAR Cup Series chase cut line. Sonoma Times is the last road or non-oval course of the season, making it his last realistic opportunity to climb back into position before the schedule shifts to tracks that favor other drivers. A win Sunday would give Times Van Gisbergen Times his Times 7th career Cup Series road course win, tying Chase Elliott Times for second most in series history. Only Times Tony Stewart, with 8, and Jeff Gordon, with 9, would remain ahead of him. Sunday also opens the Times In-Season Challenge, a 5-race bracket-style tournament Times with Times $1 million Times going to the winner, featuring Times 16 head-to-head first-round matchups. Van Gisbergen Times drew Times, Ryan Preece Times, in the opening round. The two exchanged gestures at Times Pocono, then made contact at San Diego. Van Gisbergen Times said, "I see he's been getting pretty lippy online, so that's a bit of fun. We had a little tussle last week. He kind of pulled a shitty move on me and half-spun me, so I got him back, but he's a good dude." Heading into the matchup, Van Gisbergen Times is the betting favorite at Times -160, ahead of Zilisch Times at Times +750, Times and points leader Times Tyler Reddick Times at Times +900. On the unpredictability of the sport, Van Gisbergen Times said, "As a motorsport, you don't know who's going to win. Whereas you watch F1, there's 3 guys who are going to win. I think our sport is really cool. Even at a road course, there's 10 guys who can win." Several other storylines surround Sunday's race. Ty Gibbs Times won the Cup pole with a lap of Times 114.829 miles per hour, beating Carson Hocevar Times by Times 0.025 seconds, marking his first pole of 2026. His first at Sonoma and the third of his career. Gibbs Times is also the defending Times In-Season Challenge Times champion and faces Times Austin Dillon Times in the first round. Bubba Wallace Times crashed during qualifying and will start from the rear of the field. Christopher Bell Times plans to run the full race despite a fractured wrist from a Michigan crash, qualifying Times 14th Times while sitting Times 60 points Times above the cut line. In a rematch of last year's result, Ty Dillon Times again faces Times Denny Hamlin Times in the opening round. Van Gisbergen Times enters Sunday as both the most successful active road course driver in the field and one of the sport's most visible figures, positioned as a betting favorite in a car he has already described as needing significant work. Drop a comment with your prediction for Times Sonoma and subscribe to see how it plays out.